My name is Dakota Frandsen. Many of you know me from the Bald and Bonkers show. Some others may know me as the specialist of the strange. For this series, I wanted to dedicate it to divulging information in a more serious light. To explore things a bit more in than the format for our main show allows. While the talk show format has allowed for connections to build in order for this particular story to come together, there comes a point where one must step up and be serious. It is because I have started to divulge information that I have had to share, except in private circumstances. One of the oldest tricks I've utilized when it came to this type of subject is, while I personally understood how difficult it is to share certain details about one's past when either the information was simply too traumatic or there's still much you don't understand. I understand this struggle personally. And it is something that I still struggle with to an extent. I have been fortunate in this life to put together a trusted network of individuals that have helped me either find information pertaining to these cases so I can present the most accurate of information, where they themselves have crossed paths with me before, long before I first stepped on this planet. And in order to share, in order to fully understand what's going on, why certain things are transpiring the way they are, at least to the best of my understanding, there's someone I need to introduce you to. Someone who has played an integral part. Some of you have known about this story, some of you may have heard me mention fragments of it. These were fragments I shared with reluctancy, as the story behind me has already intrigued even the most seasoned of investigators in this topic. The information I'm about to share makes the situation a bit more complex. Much more so than I ever imagined possible. But again, in order for me to share this information accurately, it is time that I introduce you to someone. This someone is not from Earth. They are from the Pleiades star cluster. Their homeworld is surrounded the Alcyone star. Their home world, his home world, is named Taalihara. I must preface the story that to those of you who believe that all Pleiadians are good guys, you need to understand that just because something is human looking does not mean it's necessarily on your side. The story of Taalihara is one of jealousy. When terraforming the planets in the Pleiades star cluster after evacuating from Lyra, the Tal race of Lyrans felt that they should inhabit the largest planet that was available in this cluster. It was seen as a status symbol, a symbol of power, a symbol of strength. They did not get this world, much to their dismay. A sister race known as the Ahil took control of the largest planet in the star cluster. Something that made the Tal very jealous. When they went to inhabit their world and started establishing themselves, they started to refer to themselves as the Tal Shiar. And out of jealousy and in a search for power, they aligned themselves with a draconian race known as the Seekar. The Seekar valued the Tal Shiar as they were skilled in espionage and stealth. Their very human-like appearance. These are the ones who are the most closely related to humans here on Earth. Their very human appearance made them invaluable for infiltration. They are typically over 6 feet, the males. The women tend to be about 5.5 to almost 6 feet tall. Very attractive. Many of them tend to have darker skin complexions, darker hair. again, they are some of the most human-looking races out there. The Taalihara's government siding with the Sikaar was seen as a major betrayal. Some of you may know of this story from Elena Denan, where a representative from the Galactic Federation of Worlds, who was from Taalihara and had to evacuate, due to his own stances in the conflict. He and many others fled and linked up and joined the Galactic Federation of Worlds, as well as other ET military forces, as a means of refugee, with hopes to one day return. The gentleman I am going to introduce to you is named Elaryon. And before any of you ask, yes, he was. He knows of Akvaru, the gentleman I mentioned before, from Elena's reports. He was a little older than Akvaru when he had to leave the planet for his own safety. But as far as any official capacity, any personal relationship, that was not really the case. The Taalihara, the ones that took refuge within the Galactic Federation of Worlds, there was the way they carried themselves. Brooding would be the word to describe it. They missed their home. They wanted nothing more to go back, but they knew going back would put them and their loved ones who were still on world in jeopardy. Story of Elaryon. He was a soldier. Low ranking. He was a soldier. He took up the position because for a while he believed the propaganda. Goddamn cough. He followed the propaganda. He felt that it was the only way to serve his world. That maybe he could do something while within the military forces. One night while he was out on patrol, he could hear the screams of young children. As he went to investigate, the first thing he noticed in the direction of the children's screams was a large beige tail. He went to approach further. A Sikaar elite had cornered 3 young children and was getting ready to kill them. Elaryon is only about 6.5 to almost 6'8" tall. He's fairly well built, athletic, as well as what was needed in his position. And he also used a weapon. He was good with weapons. The Sikaar elite was about 15 to 20 feet tall. These were the ones who had wings. They were beige in color, scaled. They were ferocious. They were brutal. And they were quick to piss off. Elena often describes the organization of the hierarchy with the Sikaar similar to organized crime, to mafia. This is true. Elaryon, seeing these children about to die, he lost control of his anger. There were rumors of the Sikaar elites harming innocent people, eating them, flat out. These stories were often treated like conspiracy theories. Mention of them would get you in trouble. And many soldiers were fearful of speaking out. That day, Elaryon lost control of himself, started screaming at the Sikaar Royal, and opening fire using a plasma-based rifle. The shots he fired didn't kill the beast. Didn't seem to do any significant damage. The Sikaar are well equipped. They are well armored. But having its dinner interrupted naturally pissed it off. And that's exactly what Elaryon was hoping for. Just 5 seconds of distraction to get those kids away. The children realized what was happening, and Elaryon quickly directed them through town to find an escape pod that was scattered all over the planet in the event of a mass evacuation. The craft was small. Looked like it was big enough to maybe carry 20 people max. About silver, opened up from the side, and had an autopilot control. Elaryon directed the children into this escape pod, continuing to fire at the Sikaar elite. And he continued to run. Once they got inside, the Draconian was able to keep up with them. It stuck its head inside the open doors of the pod. The pod was too small to carry it, and it got its head stuck within the doorway. It would slam against the craft. The kids kept screaming as this beast was continually trying to bite into him, stretching its neck as far in as it could. One of the kids started to make his way towards the controls of the pod and gets it to take off. However, the obstruction in the doorway kicked on safety measures. Think of it as a spaceship's equivalent of newer cars preventing doors from being shut because it detected someone's fingers were in the way. Very similar concept. There's no way this being was going to withdraw. The horns that it had on the side of its head would slam against the frame of the doorway. The being was too pissed off to really focus on what was happening. Elaryon started to activate security overrides meant for emergency circumstances in the event that something broke in the craft as they were trying to escape. The equipment is very sophisticated, but there was always measures in place just in case something went wrong. When it comes to space travel, as they say, the worst thing you could ever hear an astronaut say is, "Uh-oh." Craft started to take off, and it trapped the Seekar's head on the inside. Trapped it within the doorway. It was there Elaryon got an idea. He knew of the camouflage techniques that the Seekar used for their infiltration on other worlds. He also knew that there was a weak spot around the neck where they had the most trouble. Some of his fellow soldiers and him speculated that maybe that was some sort of weak spot. I get just enough of a gap between the cells that if it were to be hit, you could cause some significant damage. As the craft was taking off, the being then started to realize what was happening, slamming its hands into the craft. Every smack ringing out. Elaryon took his focus onto the being, grabbed it by the horns, and started forcing its head sideways, aligning the frame of the doorway to right about where he speculated the weak spot in its neck would be. The security overrides kicked in, closing in on the being's neck. And the gravity of the planet, which was very similar to Earth's, the ship taking off, and the door crushing in on its neck. Elaryon managed to decapitate the Seekar Royal. In its final moments of life, Elaryon could swear the eyes of this being shifted. They were no longer reptile eyes. They were human. And there are some sources that said that many of the Seekar weren't necessarily born. They were made. A sudden mutation. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But there are sources that say that the Seekar were heavily influenced by even higher draconian beings, in a manner of speaking. Before the escape pod broke through the planet's atmosphere, Elaryon had the side door opened and kicked the severed head out so the kids wouldn't have to look at it. Unsure of what to do, he heard rumors of a Galactic Federation outpost not too far from his planet. his first concern was to get those kids off that ship into safety as soon as possible. He was able to make it to them just in time to where they only sustained minimal injuries. Once outside the planet's orbit, and when he felt that he was a safe enough distance, he sent out a distress beacon, which was answered by a woman. The woman was aware of the situation on Taalihara and had helped get several refugees off that world into safety. This woman was a Tashkaru from near Sirius B. She was fairly tall herself, but it just so happened that her family that she left behind were old friends of Elaryon's family. They knew each other from childhood. And had not seen each other for a very long time. The woman provided instructions for Elaryon to get the kids off to a safe haven. Get them transferred to where they can seek the necessary medical attention. Before taking it on himself, Elaryon resisted, turned down the offer for help right away. He wanted to go back home to get much of his family as possible off planet because he knew that his actions were going to make it to where they were in danger. The woman understood where Elaryon was coming from. And made him promise that he was going to come back. There again, while she was in an official position, she was a childhood friend who hadn't seen it in a very long time. And to which Elaryon made the promise. A promise that he wasn't sure he was going to be able to keep. Using the escape pod, he returned home and parked the craft near his family home. A lot of the architecture, as it was described to me, looked like it was a mix of crystal and metal. Maneuvering through the streets as quietly as possible, Elaryon quickly learned that word of his actions had already spread. He was being treated as a traitor who had rescued who had assisted in the escape of 3 criminal thieves. And if seen, he was to be reported to immediately. He was supposed to be reported immediately, where he would likely face his punishment of death. When Elaryon reached his family home, inside, his parents, as well as his sister and brother, He had 2 brothers and a sister. They all were waiting inside, knowing what had happened. And once they realized Elaryon was in the house, his mom completely freaked out at him. His brothers believed the propaganda that he was some disgraced soldier who turned against his own people. His father was reluctant. His mother got emotional, saying things like, "How could you do this? You should have let those kids take their punishment. It was not your place." His father was the one to realize why Elaryon did what he did. He knew that his son didn't have it in him to let an innocent child be hurt, and that if he did something drastic, he knew he had a good reason. In the chaos of his family screaming, Elaryon's father approaches him, looks him dead in the eyes, says, "Son, you need to leave now. I know why you did what you did, but by you being here, it's not safe." This broke Elaryon's heart. He tried telling his family, come with him, but they wouldn't. They were going to hold off just a few minutes to buy Elaryon time to get back off-world. But then they were going to report him, as they felt that it was the safest course of action they could take to save themselves. However, it was too late. Elaryon was captured as he started to escape, knocked out. When he awoke, he found himself strapped to a table. As a reptilian scientist, likely Sikaar himself, possible Sikaar hybrid, as a matter of fact, had him cut open, straight from the base of his neck all the way down. He could see his own insides, and he felt everything. It's not like the Sikaar were going to give him a disgraced soldier anesthesia. Not like they cared enough. When the scientist, doctor, whatever the term is for him, realized Elaryon was awake, he decided to have a little fun. He knew he could get away with it. He would sing as he would take Elaryon's organs apart. And just to get a little bit more out of him, he would wrap his clawed hands around Elaryon's lungs and squeeze. Hard-headed and on the verge of death, Elaryon hung out, pulled through. He received transmissions from the woman he saw earlier, begging him to hold on. Someone was coming to get him. The Sikaar doctor, his attention was diverted when there was an explosion. He realized that the lab had been infiltrated and knew that that if he was spotted, he would likely have been captured himself. Quickly fled, leaving Elaryon sliced open, gutted, and on the verge of death. Barely having enough strength to lift his head up to see what was going on, his vision was starting to blur as he realized that someone from the Galactic Federation was coming to get him. It was a very tall man, possibly a heel from the color of his suit, but getting any more details than that would have been difficult, as the second he saw someone else human, he passed out from his injuries. Later awaking in a med bed, healed completely, but physically, mentally, he was going to need some time, for obvious reasons. The woman who had intercepted his transmission was waiting for him. Talked him into going through help, getting help from the mental resources that the Federation offered, which did involve some therapy, but as well as drugs administered to essentially sever the connections, the neurological connections that would be associated with PTSD. He agreed to the therapy but didn't want to take any drugs. Partially because he was just stubborn like that, but he also felt that if the significance of what happened to him, what made him make the choices he did and what happened to him afterwards, he felt that if the trauma was somehow reduced, the significance of the events were somehow reduced, it would take away the meaning. He felt that while he bore no physical scars, those scars were reminders of why he was the way he was and who he was. He agreed to start the rehabilitation process after he was shown that the kids were being taken care of. He cared about those kids than his own safety. A trait that would carry with him. To fast forward, just for time's sake, the Tashkaru woman, her name is somewhat hard for me to pronounce. Something similar to Ivina. She was taller than most women from her homeworld, Nyla. Going back to Elena for a brief second. Her friend Myra was from the same planet. In fact, they looked very similar. Evina had the sort of triangular face that almost gave her the appearance of a manga character. If a manga character was given flesh and blood. Her position was a tactical officer, but she also became very well versed within the mental rehabilitations processes. Something that several field officers took advantage of in order to help their teams while out in the field. They became close, realized that they had known each other their lives before, and they were soulmates. They eventually got married. During this time, Elaryon was given a choice. As a refugee for the Galactic Federation, he was given a choice to either find a way to settle on another world, to which he would be offered assistance in order to get there, or he would enlist and receive training. Evina said that she was going to support him regardless, but she already knew the answer. She knew that Elaryon would enlist, but a part of him felt guilty for associating with the rebel factions that was his homeworld. So he focused his trainings as a sort of field medic. He would still utilize his training from the Taalihara forces, but he would also become more versed in medical treatments. And because of his concern involving the children were caught in the crossfire, he enlisted in the abductions. One of the last missions flew was an abduction retrieval, taking place in the 1980s on Earth, where he and his squadron, led by none other than Orhan Iridian, rescued a young girl who was abducted by X-5s and Matra in the Midwest. Some of you may know this story and may already know where this is going. Throughout his service, Elaryon and his wife Evina agreed to take on envoy deployments in order to assist on the ground. His latest deployment was told of a world, Earth, that was starting to fall into the same pattern that led to Taalihara was. Part of him still needed to understand something. Perhaps it was closure on his part, but he needed to understand how a world could feel something like that, knowing the atrocities that were taking place. How it seemed so easy for this car to infiltrate and take over. He was warned that the vessel he would take would likely undergo some mental traumas that would bring its mentality to a very similar place to where he was in life. Evina also took on these deployments. There would be times where her and Elaryon would swap. She would go down while he would stay starside. Vice versa. For this latest one, they both went down about the same time. Only Evina may have actually arrived on Earth first. Before his envoy deployments, Elaryon was found by none other than Thorhan Iridian, simply admiring the view of the Earth from the Excelsior, as Earth forces have been known to call it. Reflecting on everything that was going on and processing what he was about to do. Thorhan happened to catch him at the right time and specifically started to talk with him. Possibly even taking part in Elaryon's transfer process. He assured Elaryon that he would once again find that girl, and to just remember a certain sign. That sign, if you watched my previous videos in this segment, you already know. Whether or not Evina's been found, that's still in development. Thorhan then proceeded to place his fingers against Elaryon's forehead like this in order to start the mind process. As he started to enter the stasis pod, the last thing he remembered physically seeing was Evina placing her hand on the glass as he was going under, absolutely bawling her eyes out. She was quite emotional, and from spending so much time with her, he started to become that way as well. In many ways, they helped each other heal through their traumas. They were soulmates. As Elaryon was going through the transfer process to allow his soul to inhabit an earthly body, memories of the body's bloodline would flood him, as if he could physically see all the information about the body's bloodlines being downloaded into him. This was a security measure which would allow him to blend in. It would make him a bit more difficult to be detected by the forces who would try to kill him. In some parts, he was targeted by the Sikaar for taking out a high-ranking member. They would want to get vengeance on him. His bloodline on Earth was also targeted by Greys, as he was a no-negative blood type, and several in his family had already been experimented on. Between his traumas in his space life and the traumas he would endure on Earth, he would gain a psychic disposition. Before he even came to Earth, little did he realize that Evina was pregnant with a little girl, who, in Elaryon's earthbound life, would come to rescue him when his earthly body was about 12 years old and he was trying to take his own life. This incident was not supposed to take place. However, because of both his earthly background and his Starside background, the people that were assigned to him, his soul family, the ones who would help protect him while he was on Earth, realized the quickest way to get him out of that dark state of mind and motivate him to keep fighting no matter what would happen was if he realized that he had a kid. This would cause some emotional distress as Elaryon's earthly incarnation started to realize who he was. And through hidden messages that would be caught in voice recording, that would be caught through several UFO sightings, and through once again meeting Elena Denon, Elaryon would have the added stress, added confusion, when he would realize that the stasis process hasn't exactly put him all the way down. Made him to where his Starside body and earthly body could essentially tap into each other's consciousness in times of need. And when his earthly incarnation would encounter severe enough otherworldly threats, he would be allowed access to his old medical base in order to give people treatment, in order to break the otherworldly ties just enough to where readily accessible civilian health authorities, as I should put it, on Earth would be able to treat the condition. And if the situation got bad enough, his family would also step in, as they would take on his kids, would grow up, take on similar positions to their parents, so they could all assist and still be together. March of 2021, Elaryon utilized his time connections to take his earthly incarnation on a little trip to meet their son. The way the envoy deployment works is that as I mentioned in previous episodes, the mother side of the bloodline would be altered over time to slowly allow for tall Pleiadian DNA to enter the bloodline so the soul could take form in the body, not reject it. In Elaryon's case, his star body and his earth body were physically related. And you would be able to see it if you saw them together. They would look like twins, except Elaryon would have better hair. So when one of them would have a child, they would both technically be a father. The situation was very similar to how identical twins would technically both be the father of a child that was born. And because of these bloodline connections, not only could Elaryon swap his consciousness with his earthly body, but when the rest of his family, his wife, his 3 children, were within close enough proximity to one another, and the necessary mental blocks to prevent this from happening, the mental exercises that most ET races are familiar with, were not utilized. They could hear each other's thoughts. They could feel everything they felt. There would be times where they can even tap into each other's eyes to see what was going on. Several contactees have implants that allow them to do this with their contacts. However, in certain bloodline connections, the technology is not necessarily needed, but it would help. Say it's a lot like a radio. The implants would essentially act as better antenna. And because of these bloodline connections, everyone in Elaryon's soul group could also tap into the thoughts, the feelings, both emotional and physical sensations. The sights, they can tap into necessarily all the senses of the individuals they were trying to help, of the individuals they were romantically involved with. And yes, that also involves who they were sexually active with. Especially who they were sexually active with. Some of you may have figured out already the connection. Why I'm mentioning Elaryon. Why I'm introducing to what I know of his backstory. And I'm not the only one who knows it, who's confirmed it. I am Elaryon. When I went through the recall sessions that were taught by Tony Rodriguez, is how I found this out. I managed to get my name, where I was from, and put together context clues to piece together what I know about my star side life. And because of the dispositions I mentioned in my last episode, as well as the dispositions Elaryon has, we can tap into each other's strengths in the time calls for it. There's been times when I would practice astral traveling, and the first place I would go would be the stasis pod, standing right in front of Elaryon's body. There's also been times when I've entered a trance-like state where, possibly from his perspective, it would be interpreted very similar to a lucid dream, but Elaryon would step into my body. The main way we could tell who was whether or not we had hair, as goofy as that may sound. My wife, Ivina, as it turns out, here's the newest little information. As it turned out, during my interview, Elena, once again, may have been onto something. During my interview on Elena Denon's channel, I talked about how, say my son, for example, March 2021 was when I found out about him. He was a newborn baby. Elaryon was the man who guided me to the Martian infirmary and sent me back. Whether that was a physical transition, the only indication I know that was the case, that it was in fact a physical trip, was the fact that my bed was broken when I crash landed. Apparently, Ivina and my children, as I was trying to say, where, say, like my son, he was a newborn March 2021, yet his most recent major visit was while I was at JISIC, October 21st, 2023. He looks like in his 20s, and he's already been promoted as the equivalent of a sergeant. It was explained how it was explained to me by my wife. Same thing with his older sister. And same thing with both of his sisters, actually. All of them, lately, look like they are in their late 20s. Elena proposed a little theory that apparently my family may be bouncing through time. In some of our contact sessions, some of our recall sessions, when they seem out of place, may be a byproduct of this. Exactly how? I'm not sure. There's been visuals I recall of guiding possible. Remember, I am not as experienced in these things. I am still learning how to focus in on this stuff. But one of the possible visuals I received was carrying a possible Negamuk juvenile to a medbed after there was a very nasty attack. And their recent joining of the Galactic Federation may indicate that it's going to be one hell of a battle. Whether or not that information makes it back to Earth, I don't know. That's the part that makes it difficult to try to validate this information. Because, as I've mentioned before, there's several other people who have physically seen me starside. But as far as being able to provide photos, videos, maybe even an audio tape, it's very difficult to catch any of that while I'm up there. And what I wouldn't give to have some way to download what I remember from my brain and upload it as a video to my computer and show you all. But in the end, it still remains the same. I bring this up to try to tell a little bit more about my backstory. A bit more of the exotic parts that are much more difficult to validate. But my understanding of it becomes crucial in understanding my overall part. Because while it seems like my family are messing around through time, it appears that Evina may in fact be in an envoy on Earth as we speak. As for who she is, I'm not 100% sure. I've scared off a lot of women when I would try to figure this out on my own, because I would get overly excited and think that they were the mother of my children. And God, I hope when I go into post that all the orbs that are flashing my camera right now are caught, because it's very convenient. I might have to just post a raw video. But I do know that at least my son and my daughter, and maybe Evina herself through some psychic link, have been providing clues. As for exactly how that all works, those will be subjects for another video. And if there's something that any of you would like me to cover in this segment, please do let me know. It doesn't necessarily have to be ET related. But I will see you next time.